On Sunday nights during the course of this summer, I have started doing a series of lessons that are really, in a lot of ways, more informational than typical sermons. And the background of that is they are lessons that are essentially lessons that I use in teaching a course that is an introduction to the Old Testament that I teach freshmen over at Florida College. And of course, there are about 75 lectures and classes in that course. And so during the course of this summer, I'm only giving a selection of some of those. But hopefully it'll be some things that will help us to look at the Old Testament as a whole. One of the things the students in that course often appreciate is the opportunity to go all the way through the Old Testament in a relatively short span of time. And while even there we can't by any means cover everything in the Old Testament, here even less, still I think the value of this is to get sort of a bird's eye view of the Old Testament. And thus far we spent one lesson looking at some things about the Bible account of creation and some different ideas people have about that. In the second of our lessons we talked about the consequences of sin and how Genesis chapters 3 through 11 show us just what has happened to mankind and to this world because of sin. Because the overall theme of the Bible is the redemption of man from sin. God, the Creator, will redeem man, his creature, from the sin that man has fallen into and committed and that has separated him from God. Then the third lesson, we looked especially at Genesis chapter 12 and some of the following chapters, and there we focused on the subject of the promise that God made to Abraham. We made the point that really that promise becomes the driving force throughout all of the rest of the Bible. From Genesis chapter 12 to the end of the book of Revelation can really be understood as the story of how God fulfills the promise to Abraham that through the seed of Abraham all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And God would bring the blessing of salvation from sin that would be the answer to the curse that had come upon man because of his sin. And so all the rest of the Bible focuses on those descendants of Abraham. Including, of course, our Lord himself, Jesus, of the seed of Abraham, and all of the apostles, and all of the first members of the church in Acts chapter 2, the seed of Abraham. All the rest of the Bible from that point on focuses on the land that God promised to Abraham. The land that some people today call the Holy Land, the land of Palestine or Israel, where all of those events transpired as God worked out his plan of salvation. Well, of course, those descendants of Abraham, those children of promise, we probably today most commonly refer to them as the Jews. Sometimes we refer to them as the Hebrew people. But in the Old Testament, they are most commonly called the children of Israel. Interestingly, not most commonly the children of Abraham, though sometimes they were called that, but most commonly they're called the children of Israel. And last week, we looked at that character Israel, the grandson of Abraham, better known to us by the name of Jacob. And we saw the pitfalls and the successes, the blessings and the curses of his life. We saw the times where he was faithful and the times where he was unfaithful. And of course, the very name Israel that God gave him means one who strives with God. And the history of God working out his plan of salvation often involved God working with less than cooperative mankind. Even among the children of Israel, whom God chose, they were not always cooperative. And like their ancestor Jacob, those 12 descendants of Jacob, those 12 sons and their tribes that descended from him, strove with God throughout their history. And we are reminded by that this plan of salvation that God provides is not something that mankind had earned by his righteousness. Jacob didn't earn it by his righteousness. The children of Israel did not earn it by their righteousness, but it was something that God, by his grace, gave. And we're going to see that theme over and over again.